All right, so now that you've gotten past, you've learned about the different types of resources, we need to look at where do we find these things, right? So Google search is what most of us typically do. I know I'm guilty of just pulling stuff from Google a lot, but it's not necessarily the best source for what you're trying to do. So types of resources, we have library catalogs, newspaper and periodical indexes and databases, general and specialized databases, and other online resources. So if you look next to the types of resources on the right, you will have examples of those. Library catalogs are what you will use most when you go to university. Manor Hall does have a library catalog, but we do not have access for secondary students. It doesn't really have the resources for us. However, you can access newspaper and periodical indexes. For example, the New York Times, Houston Chronicle, Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. If you look for some of these, if you look for a database for your topic, there's a pretty good chance that you will find one that is open. Sometimes it takes a little digging. I typically use, I know it's not on here, because I've graduated from university now and I no longer have access to my university's database, I use Google Scholar. So it's scholar.google.com, and that will walk you through, or that will pull articles from periodicals and whatnot. So they tend to be more reputable sources. And sources that are peer-reviewed, which are sources that have been looked over by multiple people and fact-checked and so on and so forth. All right, so using search engines. The key to finding the best online resource lies in knowing how to search. First, know your options. So there isn't just one search engine, and there are quite a few different databases, and you need to know which one to use. For this case, you are going to use Google Scholar. If you find a database specifically for science, feel free to use it, right? There's no shame in doing so. When you get to university, you will have the option through your university's catalog to choose what database you search through. But like I said, we don't really have one of those here, but you will most likely have one when you get to university. I've yet to go to a university that didn't have at least something. Outside of that, what you can do with what you have now are use specific search terms. Okay, so remember we talked about those keywords. Look for those keywords in Google Scholar or in regular Google if you're just looking for baseline information. The more specific your terms are, the less junk you have to filter through. If you just plug in your entire question, you're really not likely to get good results. You're going to end up with a bunch of stuff that's kind of related, but 3 words matched what you originally searched, and it's not really what you want. The second thing you can do is use search limiters. So enclose names, related words, or phrases in quotation marks. For instance, Big Brother in those quotation marks, which means you will explicitly search for those words in that specific order, right? So using quotations can be a great way to narrow down sources. The third thing you can do is assess results and select only the best. So never just click on the first result. Please, it's a waste of time. A lot of times it's not 100% what you want. You might have to scroll through quite a few different pages of sources before you find something that actually relates to what you're talking about or is exactly what you're looking for. Scan the first 10 to 15 descriptions in the search engine and decide whether you need to take something out of your keyword search or put something in or whatever to make sure you narrow your results the way you want them narrowed. All right, so what to look for when you're looking for sources? We have several different categories here on the left, including relevance, timeliness, /currency, author's purpose, accuracy, author's credentials, publisher's reputation, and depth and level of coverage. Now, you need to decide whether or not a source is a good source, right? And what do we look for? Well, we look for these things in the left column. So when we talk about relevance, we're talking about, is what you found related to what you're actually arguing? You can't write a research paper about monkeys and pull an article about snakes. Like it doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't matter if you find this really cool, BuzzFeed article and you want to incorporate it because it's really nifty, don't use it. It's not relevant. All right, timeliness. Topics in science, medicine, and sports in particular, but some others, often need the most recent information. Something around, English, history, there might be new looks at things, but for the most part, for the last however many years, 50, 60, sometimes more, the ideas on a topic haven't changed. The history hasn't changed, right? But science and medicine and, sports, those are changing all the time. Author's purpose, well, ask yourself, was the source created to inform, entertain, persuade, or some combination of these? In general, informative pieces are researched more carefully than those designed to entertain or sell. Like, again, BuzzFeed. Does BuzzFeed really research their stuff 100%? That's up for debate, right? But something like a science journal, those facts from those sorts of things would be researched quite a bit. All right, accuracy. Most print encyclopedias, dictionaries, and almanacs are accurate because they were reviewed and edited carefully. And this is the same for journals too. Something that's just thrown online, even in some databases, you need to be a little bit leery of, right? You need to ensure accuracy. The best thing to do is to see if you can find whatever fact or statistic you want to use in multiple sources. Because if you can find what you're looking for in multiple sources, that means that multiple people have come to the same conclusion, which is good for you. Unless it's against your argument, and then maybe not so good. All right. Publisher's reputation. I skipped one. Author's credentials. Look for an author that has written on the same topic before. Would you want to read a book about politics for somebody that just got into politics themselves? No, not really. You would want to read a book by somebody that's done this a lot, right? And they've spent their whole life, dedicated to whatever it is they're talking about. All right, so you want to be able to view them as an expert. All right, publisher's reputation. University presses tend to produce carefully researched and carefully edited books. Publications and websites that focus on celebrities, fads, gossip, so on and so forth are more often than not unreliable. I'm trying to think, there's a magazine at home. It's like the Global Inquirer or something like that. It's a bunch of crap. Don't try to use one of those for your sources. It's not good for you. All right, depth and level of coverage. So for books, study the table of contents, index and appendix to determine what aspects of your topic are covered and how much space is devoted to them. For websites, consult the sitemap for the same purpose. Did they just spend, 2 sentences of 9 pages talking about what you're talking about or what you're trying to pull from it? Or did they spend, 7 pages of 9 pages talking about that one topic? It makes a difference about, how much time was actually dedicated into that particular information that you want to use. All right. So clues to the reliability of a website. It's okay to find some stuff online, just off of Google, for example, but you need to be really leery about whether or not a source is credible. You are only as credible as your least credible source. So let me say that again. You are only as credible as your least credible source. So if I use all blogs and all Facebook posts and Twitter posts for my research paper isn't going to mean much of anything, is it? But if I use something, sources from periodicals and books and first-hand accounts, interviews and so on, I'm going to have a pretty good baseline for my paper. All right, clues to reliability of a website. The address or URL, is the most important thing you can look at. If it's .com or .net, it literally could have been created by anybody. Let's see, who are we going to pick on? I don't know, Zaid Qasim or Amr or anybody could have gone and created this website and been like, yeah, this is 100% real, and it's really all fake. But anything that's .gov or .org is often reliable because, government, unless, you think the government's biased, or .org is reliable because it represents a nonprofit organization. So ORG stands for organization, and gov obviously stands for government. Also look at the purpose of a site. So click on the About Us or a similar link that introduces you to the site's creators. Credited sources, explanatory notes, information about the author's credentials, and working links to reputable sites are really good signs, right? They're positive signs because that shows us that, one, the site is really well researched before it just published stuff out here, and two, it'll give us a little insight on whether or not the creators of the site were biased or if they were, paid by somebody, which we don't want to find sites like that. All right, criteria for evaluating newspapers and periodicals. Look at the publication reputation, the author's credentials, the date, the verifiability, source. These are just some things you should look at. I will let you guys stop and take notes. You should be taking notes on all of these different ways, all these criteria for evaluating sources, because you will be responsible for finding your own sources. Just to give the basic rundown, publication reputation. So many large circulation newspapers and national magazines like the Washington Post have a reputation of excellence. BBC, I would argue, would be another one of those. We tend to trust what they say because they're mostly unbiased. Author's credentials, a lot of times they'll tell you about the writer, and so they'll choose writers that are professors or, considered heads of their field. That way we know they know what they're talking about. The date, again, we want to try to find the most recent sources available, no matter what you're doing. Literature and history are about the only two things that I'll give you a little bit of leeway room for dates. But anything else, you really need to have no more than probably 10 years old, okay, for sources. Can you verify the information from other sources? Like I said before, if you can confirm a fact in the source that you're reading with the same fact in another source, then you know that information is probably good. But if you can't, you should really kind of question whether or not you can verify things. All right, source. If the article first appeared in another source, be sure the original source is reliable. Articles from AP or the Associated Press and the New York Times news service are generally reliable. AP, so the way news works, it used to literally be you would get a call on a wire, or an article would come through on a wire, and then it would be one newspaper was actually publishing it, and then all the other newspapers could borrow that article and publish it. So if that article originated in a newspaper that's not as credible, you need to be really leery about accepting it. Criteria for evaluating nonfiction books. It's similar in a lot of ways, some differences. So research-based findings. To determine whether or not a book is based on research, check the back for a bibliography. You can also look for footnotes or endnotes or any sort of explanation or an appendix or ads, or an appendix that adds information such as maps or letters or any other primary source, right? Again, you should look at author's purpose and the copyright date. So it'll help you determine whether or not the book was written while the event was happening or after, or so on and so forth.
Listen, this is Mr. Jeremy speaking. Plagiarism? Not a good idea. Don't do it. In college, you get kicked out. Big penalties. Manor Hall, you'll get a 0 for whatever you did. It's not worth it. Think twice. Thank you. This is a public service announcement from Mr. Jeremy.
All right, you heard it here first, folks. You plagiarize, you get a 0. Actually quite happy to hear that. All right, so note-taking. How do we avoid plagiarism and how do we avoid another 0? Well, let's find out. All right, source list. Begin by listing sources. Your note cards will help you with this. For each of the following source types, add this information. So you can go ahead and stop the video, write all these down for the web source, the book, encyclopedia, periodical. Write what you need here, because as you take notes for your research paper, you need to be copying the dates, the authors, the titles, and so on and so forth, so that you can make your works cited page, which helps prevent you from plagiarizing in one aspect. There are some others, so go ahead and stop the video here and record these down, and we'll get back to things.